My name is Thomas Hale, and for the last 7 years I have been the sole lighthouse keeper stationed on Black Reef Point, a stretch of rock and sea so isolated that supply boats only come twice a month, if the weather allows it. I'm not telling this as a campfire story or a piece of folklore. I'm writing it because everything I'm about to describe happened within a single day, and by the end of that day, I understood why the rules in the Lighthouse logbook were written the way they were. Short, blunt, and without explanation. If you ever find this account, it means I didn't follow at least one of them. The job itself is simple, almost boring, and that's what draws people to it. You wake up with the tide charts, check the lantern mechanisms, clean the lenses, log weather conditions, and make sure the rotating beacon never fails. Ships don't forgive darkness. Neither does the fog. The isolation wears on you at first, but after a while the quiet becomes routine. You start measuring time by wind direction and the way salt dries on the windows. You stop expecting company. The fog, though, is never routine. Black Reef is notorious for it. Cold currents collide here, pushing thick banks of fog straight out of the ocean, swallowing the lighthouse so completely that the beam becomes a dull glow trapped in cotton. When I first arrived, my supervisor gave me the standard safety briefing, then slid a separate envelope across the desk. Inside was a laminated sheet titled Midnight Fog Procedures. No logos, no official stamps, just rules. I laughed at first. That's a normal reaction. You don't expect superstition in a government job. But the supervisor didn't laugh back. He just told me to follow them exactly, especially the ones about midnight. Then he wished me luck and never came back. By the time the day this story is about began, I had already memorized the rules. I'd never had to break them before. The morning started like any other. Clear skies, low wind, the sea flat enough to look like tarnished metal. I logged barometric pressure, ran a diagnostic on the lamp, and checked the generator fuel. Everything was normal. Too normal. By noon, I noticed the temperature dropping faster than expected. By early afternoon, the horizon had begun to blur, the line between water and sky smearing into nothing. Fog doesn't roll in at Black Reef. It arrives all at once, like someone closing a door. By 5:40 p.m., visibility was down to less than 30 meters. The beam was already on, cutting slow circles through grey. I made an early dinner, ate standing up, and checked the rules again out of habit. Rule 1, when the fog arrives before sunset, secure all exterior doors and windows by nightfall. I did that, I always did. Rule 2, at exactly 11:55 p.m. Shut down all interior lights except the stairwell. I'd never understood that one, but I followed it every time. Rule 3, if you hear footsteps on the outer gallery after midnight, do not investigate. The wind can sound like anything if you let it. Rule 4, if the foghorn activates on its own, log the time but do not attempt to disable it. Rule 5 was underlined twice. Never look directly into the fog from ground level between 1200 am and 12:20 am. There were more, but those were the ones that mattered most. At 11:30 p.m., the fog was so thick that the lighthouse felt buried. Sound didn't travel right. The ocean was silent, as if muffled by a heavy blanket. I went through the motions slowly, deliberately, trying to keep my nerves steady. I'd worked through fog dozens of times before, but something about this one felt heavier, denser, like it had weight. At 11:55 p.m. exactly, I shut off the interior lights, leaving only the stairwell bulb glowing dim yellow. Shadows stretched along the curved walls, bending with the shape of the tower. I sat at the small desk near the radio, notebook open, pen ready. Midnight came without a sound, no horn, no wind, no waves. Then, at 12:03 am, I heard footsteps. They weren't loud. That was the worst part. Slow, deliberate steps, metal against stone, pacing the outer gallery just beyond the thick glass. The gallery circled the lantern room, a narrow walkway with a waist, high railing. In heavy weather, the wind could make it creak. This wasn't that. These were footsteps with rhythm. I froze, staring straight ahead, my hands clenched around the pen. Rule 3 echoed in my head. Do not investigate. The steps stopped directly outside the lantern room door. Something brushed against the metal, a scraping sound, slow and careful, like fingers testing the surface. At 12:07 am, the foghorn sounded. It wasn't the normal blast. It was shorter, uneven, like someone cutting it off mid-cycle. I logged the time with shaking hands, writing numbers that looked wrong on the page. The horn sounded again at 12:09, then fell silent. The footsteps resumed, moving away this time, circling the gallery, then fading into the fog. I sat there until my muscles ached, eyes fixed on the stairwell light, waiting for 12:20 to pass. My mouth was dry. My heart hammered in my ears. I told myself it was just stress, just isolation doing what it always does. At 12:18 am, something tapped on the glass. Once, twice. Not hard enough to crack it. Just enough to be intentional. I didn't look. I swear I didn't. I kept my eyes down, focused on the floor, counting my breaths, counting the seconds. The tapping stopped. At exactly 12:20 am, the fog seemed to loosen its grip. Sound returned in small pieces, a distant wave, a gust of wind. I waited another full minute before turning my head. The glass was clear. The gallery was empty. I exhaled for the first time in what felt like an hour and stood up, legs unsteady. That should have been the end of it. Usually, that's where the rules keep you safe. But when I looked down at the logbook, I realized something had been added beneath my last entry. Written in neat, careful handwriting that wasn't mine, were the words, "You almost looked. I didn't sleep after that. I tried." Lying on the narrow bunk with my boots still on, staring at the low ceiling as the lighthouse hummed and clicked around me. Every small sound felt amplified, every creak a potential warning. I kept replaying the words in the logbook, tracing the shape of the letters in my mind. They were written calmly, evenly, like a reminder left by someone who had all the time in the world. You almost looked. By 1:00 am, I gave up on rest and returned to the lantern room. Routine is a lifeline in isolation, and I clung to it harder than ever. I checked the lens rotation, verified the generator load, and ran a systems scan I'd already run twice that night. Everything read normal. That somehow made it worse. If something had been wrong, I could have blamed equipment, blamed fatigue. Instead, the lighthouse stood there perfectly functional, like it was complicit. The fog hadn't lifted. If anything, it had thickened again, pressing against the glass until the beam looked like it was struggling to escape. I remembered Rule 6 then, the one I rarely thought about. If visibility does not improve after 12:30 am, remain above ground level until dawn. That rule was usually irrelevant. The fog always thinned by then. At 1:12 am, the radio crackled. I nearly jumped out of my skin. No incoming transmissions were scheduled, and the signal out here was unreliable at best. I lifted the receiver slowly, listening to the static swell and fade. Then a voice came through, distorted but unmistakably human. "Lighthouse Keeper, do you copy?" It sounded strained, like the speaker was speaking through water. I hesitated, hand tightening around the receiver. There wasn't a rule about answering the radio. That omission suddenly felt intentional. I pressed the transmit button. "This is Black Reef Light. Identify yourself." The pause that followed was too long. Long enough for doubt to creep in. Long enough for me to consider hanging up. Then the voice returned, clearer this time. "Supply boat ran aground. Fog came in too fast. We can see your light." My stomach dropped. If a boat had run aground near Black Reef, it would be serious. The reefs here tear hulls apart. Protocol said I should alert the Coast Guard immediately, coordinate rescue. My fingers hovered over the emergency channel. Then the voice added, softly, "We're on the rocks below you." Below me. I walked to the edge of the lantern room, stopping short of the glass. Rule 5 flashed through my mind again. Never look directly into the fog from ground level between 12:00 am and 12:20 am. That window had passed. Technically, I was allowed to look now. Technically. I leaned forward just enough to peer down the tower's exterior stairs, the beam casting long, warped shadows. The fog swallowed everything more than a few meters away. I couldn't see the rocks. I couldn't see the sea. I definitely couldn't see a boat. "I don't have visual," I said into the radio. "Give me a bearing." Signal with a flare. Another pause. Then a faint sound carried up through the fog. A horn, not the foghorn. A handheld air horn, weak and irregular. It came from directly beneath the lantern room. My mouth went dry. There was no landing beneath the lantern room. Just sheer stone and the outer gallery. No place a person could stand safely. No place a boat could lodge itself. Please, the voice said, closer now, clearer, as if the fog itself were carrying it upward. We're right here. We can't see the stairs. I checked the time. 1:19 a.m. My heart started to race again. Rule 7 surfaced, one I'd never had to test. Do not provide guidance to voices in the fog. They already know the way. I'm contacting the Coast Guard. I said, forcing my voice steady. Stay where you are. The response came immediately. Too immediately. We are. The radio went dead. I stood there, listening to the static, every instinct screaming at me to do something, anything. If this were real, if people were actually stranded on the rocks, my hesitation could cost lives. That's the kind of guilt that destroys you. That's the kind of guilt the rules never explain. At 1:27 am, I heard shouting. Not from the radio. From outside. Multiple voices this time. Overlapping, indistinct, carried upward by the fog. I couldn't make out words, just urgency, panic. One voice rose above the others, closer than the rest. Thomas! I flinched. No one out here knew my name. The supply logs used employee numbers, not names. I hadn't spoken my name on the radio. The shouting grew louder, closer, circling the tower like the footsteps had earlier. I backed away from the glass, pressing myself against the interior wall, hands over my ears. My heart hammered so hard it hurt. Thomas, the voice called again, right outside the door now. We can't see. Open up. I stared at the metal door leading to the outer gallery. The handle didn't move. Nothing knocked. It was just the voice, perfectly positioned, as if the fog itself were speaking. Rule 8. If your name is spoken from outside during the fog, do not respond. You did not give it permission to know you. I slid down to the floor, knees pulled to my chest, eyes fixed on the door. The voices continued for several minutes, pleading, accusing, bargaining. They described cold water, broken bones, the rocks tearing at them. They described things no one could see from where they claimed to be. Then, slowly, they stopped. At 1:45 am, the foghorn sounded again, a single long blast that vibrated through the tower. When it fell silent, so did everything else. I checked the logbook with shaking hands. Another line had been added beneath the last. You did better that time. By the time the foghorn stopped vibrating through the tower, my nerves felt raw, like they'd been scraped clean. I stayed on the floor for a long time after that, my back against the wall, listening to my own breathing and the low mechanical hum of the lighthouse. I didn't trust silence anymore. Silence felt like something waiting. At 200 am, I forced myself to stand. My legs shook as if I'd been running, not sitting still for nearly an hour. I told myself I needed to keep functioning, keep logging, keep the light burning. Whatever was happening outside, ships still depended on that beam. If I let fear shut me down, then the lighthouse would fail in the only way that mattered. I checked the logbook again, half expecting to see another message appear while I watched. Nothing changed. The ink was dry. The handwriting was still calm, precise, mocking in its neatness. I closed the book and set it aside, turning my attention to the instrument panel. At 2:07 am, the anemometer spiked. That shouldn't have happened. Wind readings jumped from a steady 8 knots to nearly 30 in the span of a few seconds, then dropped again just as fast. Outside, the fog didn't move. It didn't swirl or thin or react the way fog normally does in strong wind. It just hung there, heavy and unmoved, as if the air itself were trapped inside it. I remembered Rule 9 then, one of the stranger ones. Sudden weather changes during fog are local only. Do not extrapolate. Do not investigate the cause. The lighthouse shook slightly, not from wind, but from something heavier brushing past the base of the tower. I felt it through the soles of my boots, a deep, dull vibration that traveled upward through the stone. My first thought was a wave, maybe a rogue swell hitting the rocks, but the vibration wasn't sharp or violent. It was slow, measured, like something large shifting its weight. I stepped away from the instruments, pulse pounding, and moved toward the narrow window that looked down the interior stairwell. The yellow bulb cast long shadows along the spiral steps. Everything looked empty. Normal. I took a breath and started down anyway, reminding myself of Rule 6. Remain above ground level until dawn if visibility does not improve. I stopped after 3 steps. The vibration came again, stronger this time, followed by a scraping sound from below. Stone against stone, not waves, not wind. At 20:14 am, the emergency phone rang. That phone was hardwired directly to the mainland, separate from the radio. It almost never rang. When it did, it meant something official, something real. My hands hovered over it, fingers stiff. I answered. "Black Reef Light," I said. There was no static this time. The line was clear. "Thomas Hale," a man's voice said. "Calm, professional. This is Coastal Operations. We've been trying to reach you." Relief hit me so hard my knees nearly buckled. "Thank God," I said, before I could stop myself. "I've been getting strange transmissions. There might be people in the water." A pause. Papers rustling faintly in the background. "There are no vessels scheduled anywhere near your location tonight," the voice said. "No distress calls logged. Weather satellites show minimal wind and no unusual activity." I swallowed. Then why did the foghorn activate on its own? Why am I hearing voices? Another pause, longer this time. "Thomas," the man said carefully. "Are you alone in the tower right now?" "Yes." Were all exterior doors secured? I glanced at the metal door leading to the outer gallery, then toward the base of the tower far below. "Yes." "Good," he said. "Listen to me very closely. The fog at Black Reef is classified as a localized hazard. There are procedures for a reason. Have you been following them?" My throat tightened. "Yes, I think so." "You think so?" he repeated. "Or you have," I said. It wasn't entirely a lie. The line went quiet for a moment. Then the man spoke again, his voice lower now. "If you hear instructions that conflict with the procedures, you must ignore them, even if they sound official, even if they use your name." Cold crept down my spine. "How do you know about that?" Another pause. When he answered, his voice sounded strained. "Because you're not the first keeper at Black Reef." A loud impact shook the base of the tower, hard enough to rattle the fixtures. Dust drifted from the ceiling. The vibration lingered, like something leaning against the stone. "What was that?" I asked. "Do not look outside," the man said immediately. His comm cracked, just slightly. "Do not go below ground level. Whatever you do, do not open the tower." The scraping sound returned, louder now, circling the base of the lighthouse. I could hear it clearly through the floor, a slow, deliberate movement tracing the curve of the stone. Something was down there, something large enough to wrap around the tower. "I can hear it," I whispered. "I know," he said. "That means it knows you're awake." My grip tightened on the phone. "What is it?" Another pause. This one felt heavy, loaded. "We don't use names," he said finally. "Names make it easier for it to listen." The scraping stopped directly beneath me. Then came a knock, not on the outer gallery door, from below, from inside the tower. 3 slow knocks, echoing up the stairwell. My blood ran cold. "That's not possible," I said. "There's no door down there." "I know," the man said. "Do not answer it." The knocks came again, closer now, as if traveling upward, reverberating through the stone itself. Each one felt like it landed in my chest. The emergency phone crackled. Then the man spoke one last time, his voice urgent. "Thomas, whatever happens next, do not let it inside your head. The fog is not outside the lighthouse. It never has been." The line went dead. The knocking stopped. In the sudden silence, I realized something far worse than the sounds themselves. The stairwell light flickered. The stairwell light flickered again, once, twice, then steadied, casting the same sickly yellow glow down the spiral. I stood frozen at the top step, every muscle locked, listening for the knock to return. It didn't. Whatever had been moving below the tower had gone still, like a predator pausing to see if its prey would make the next mistake. I checked my watch. 2:31 a.m. The foghorn was silent. The radio was dead. The emergency phone lay heavy in my hand, the line giving nothing but a flat, lifeless tone. I hung it up slowly, as if a sudden movement might draw attention. My thoughts felt sluggish, like they were pushing through syrup. The man's last words kept repeating in my head. The fog is not outside the lighthouse. I forced myself to breathe, counting each inhale and exhale until the tightness in my chest eased just enough to think. I needed the rules, the physical copy. Not the ones in my head, but the laminated sheet locked in the drawer beneath the desk. I needed to see them, to anchor myself to something written before this night had begun. I crossed the lantern room carefully, every step measured. The lighthouse felt different now, less like a structure and more like something hollowed out, a shell I was hiding inside. I unlocked the drawer and pulled out the sheet, spreading it flat on the desk beneath the dim light. The rules looked unchanged. Same black text, same blunt phrasing, but something caught my eye immediately. There were hand-written notes in the margins. I hadn't put them there. I never would have. The handwriting matched the logbook exactly. Neat, precise, unhurried. Next to Rule 6, someone had written, "Up is safer than down, but not forever." My mouth went dry. I scanned the rest of the page, heart pounding. Beside Rule 3, it prefers to be invited. Beside Rule 5, sight is consent. At the bottom of the page, beneath the last printed rule, a new line had been added in pen. If it knocks from inside, you waited too long. A low sound rolled through the tower, barely audible at first. Not a knock, not a scrape. A groan, deep and resonant, like stone under pressure. The floor vibrated beneath my boots as the sound traveled upward, through the walls, into my bones. I backed away from the desk, clutching the rules sheet like it might physically protect me. The sound grew louder, resolving into something disturbingly rhythmic. Breathing, slow, heavy breaths rising through the stairwell. "No," I whispered, before I could stop myself. The word echoed too clearly in the confined space. I clamped my mouth shut, cursing myself. Silence returned, thick and oppressive. I stood there, muscles trembling, listening for a reaction. It came in the form of footsteps, not on the outer gallery, not below, on the stairs. Slow, deliberate steps ascending the spiral, each one placed with careful intention. Stone creaked softly under the weight. Whatever was coming up the stairs wasn't rushing. It wasn't confused. It knew exactly where it was going. I stumbled backward until my shoulders hit the wall, eyes locked on the stairwell opening. The yellow light cast warped shadows that stretched and twisted with each movement below. The steps continued, one by one, unhurried. At 20:38 a.m., a shape crossed into view. At first, it looked wrong in a way I couldn't immediately explain. Too tall, too narrow. It moved with a stiffness that reminded me of someone imitating human motion without fully understanding it. The light caught the edge of something pale, then slid away again as it climbed. I squeezed my eyes shut. Sight is consent. I pressed the rules sheet against my chest, turning my face toward the wall, focusing on the texture of the stone beneath my fingertips. I could still hear it. The sound of breathing, the faint scrape of something dragging along the inner curve of the stairs. A voice spoke. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It filled the space effortlessly, vibrating through the walls instead of traveling through the air. "Thomas," it said. The way it said my name was wrong. Too careful. Like it was tasting it. I didn't respond. I didn't move. I barely breathed. The footsteps stopped. The breathing drew closer, heavy and wet now, right at the edge of my hearing. I felt pressure against the side of my head, like someone leaning in close enough that I should have felt warmth. There was none, only cold. "You keep the light on," the voice said. "You watch the water. You let us come and go." My heart hammered so hard I was sure it could hear it. I clenched my jaw until it ached, refusing to answer. A pause. Then a sound that chilled me more than anything else that night. It laughed. The laugh was soft, almost fond, like I'd disappointed it in a minor way. The pressure eased. The footsteps resumed, this time continuing past me, circling the lantern room just out of reach of my vision. I stayed pressed to the wall, eyes shut tight, counting each step as it moved around the room. One circle, then another. At 2:44 a.m., the footsteps stopped again. I heard metal shift, a hinge creak. The outer gallery door. Panic flared, sharp and blinding. That door had been locked. I checked it myself. The sound was unmistakable, the slow pull of metal opening against resistance. Cold air rushed in, carrying the scent of salt and something deeper, older. The voice spoke again, farther away now. "You are very good at this," it said. "Most of them look." The door closed with a gentle click. Silence flooded back in, broken only by the distant hum of the lantern mechanism. I slid down the wall, legs giving out beneath me, the rules sheet crumpling in my fist. I stayed there for a long time, shaking, afraid that if I moved, it would come back. Eventually, I forced myself to open my eyes. The lantern room was empty. The stairwell light still burned steadily. The outer gallery door stood closed, looking exactly as it always had. I checked the lock. It was still engaged. I stumbled back to the desk and opened the logbook with trembling hands. A new entry waited for me. "We prefer keepers who learn quickly." Below it, written smaller, almost like an afterthought, were 4 words that made my blood run cold. "Dawn is negotiable." I don't remember standing up from the floor. One moment I was staring at the words in the logbook, my vision blurring as my hands shook, and the next I was back at the instrument panel, gripping its edge like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Dawn is negotiable. The phrase lodged itself in my head and refused to leave. Dawn wasn't supposed to be negotiable. Dawn was the one certainty out here, the end of the fog, the return of normal sound, normal light, normal rules. I checked the clock again. 2:52 a.m. The night was barely half over. I wiped my palms on my pants and forced myself to focus on tasks, checklists, readouts, anything that didn't involve thinking about what had just been in the room with me. The beam continued its slow rotation, cutting the fog into pale slices. Somewhere beyond that fog, ships still relied on that light. That thought grounded me, even as something else gnawed at the back of my mind. The phrase the voice had used, "You let us come and go." At 3:01 am, the generator load dipped. It wasn't drastic, just enough to trigger a warning light. I frowned and leaned closer, scanning the panel. Fuel levels were steady. No mechanical faults. I adjusted the output manually, and the load stabilized. For a few seconds, everything seemed normal again. Then the warning light flicked back on. I felt a surge of irritation cut through the fear. Equipment didn't just misbehave out of spite. I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward the maintenance hatch, stopping short as Rule 6 echoed in my head again. Remain above ground level until dawn. The generator room was below the lantern level, accessed by the lower stairs. I hesitated, torn between procedure and practicality. If the generator failed completely, the light would go out. That was not an option. Ships didn't care about fog rules. At 3:06 a.m., the foghorn sounded. Not on its own this time. I watched the control panel as it activated, responding to something. A sensor trigger. Something in the fog. I logged the time automatically, then froze as a second horn answered it. Not from the lighthouse. From the fog. It was wrong in a way I couldn't quite articulate. The pitch was off, slightly lower, and it didn't carry the same mechanical echo. It sounded like an imitation, a memory of a foghorn rather than the real thing. The call and response continued, my horn sounding, then the other, farther out, closer, farther again. My stomach twisted. Ships used foghorns to signal position, to say I am here. Do not hit me. I remembered another handwritten note I hadn't noticed before, faint and nearly erased, at the very bottom of the rules sheet. If it answers the horn, it is mapping you. The generator warning light began to pulse faster. I made a decision then, driven more by panic than logic. I needed eyes on the generator. I needed to know if this was real or just another manipulation. I descended the stairs slowly, flashlight cutting a narrow tunnel through the dimness. Each step felt like a betrayal of the rules, but the tower remained silent, watching. At the landing just above ground level, I stopped. The air felt thicker here, colder. The fog pressed against the small windows like a living thing, opaque and unmoving. I did not look directly into it. I kept my eyes on the steps, on the walls, on the familiar bolts and seams of the lighthouse interior. The generator room door stood ahead, slightly ajar. It hadn't been like that earlier. I swallowed hard and pushed it open the rest of the way. The generator hummed steadily, its vibration reassuring. Nothing appeared broken. No leaks, no sparks. The warning light on the panel flicked off as I watched. Relief washed over me, quickly followed by dread. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't muddy. They weren't wet. They were impressions, pressed into the thin layer of salt dust that always settled on the concrete floor. Long, narrow, bare, they circled the generator once, then continued toward the back wall, toward a section of concrete that wasn't supposed to open. I stared at the footprints, my mind racing. No one had been down here. No one could have been down here without passing me on the stairs. I hadn't heard anything, hadn't felt anything. A low vibration pulsed through the room, gentle but persistent, like something breathing just beyond the wall. The concrete looked unchanged, but the air around it felt wrong, distorted, as if the space were deeper than it should be. The radio on my belt crackled. I jumped, fumbling for it. Hello? Static. Then a voice too close, too clear. You came down. It wasn't coming from the radio. It was coming from behind me. I spun around, flashlight beam slicing across the room. Empty. The door stood open, the stairwell beyond it dim and still. The footprints, however, had changed. There were more of them now. They led from the back wall straight toward me, stopping inches from my boots. You're not supposed to come down, the voice said again, now seeming to come from everywhere at once. The walls, the floor, the generator's steady hum. This part is for the light. My chest tightened. I just needed to check the generator, I said, hating the way my voice trembled. A pause. Then something like amusement rippled through the air. You always say that. The foghorn outside answered again, closer this time, the false horn nearly overlapping the real one. The generator's hum deepened, straining. I backed toward the door, eyes fixed on the footprints, refusing to look anywhere else. The vibration in the wall intensified, dust trembling loose and falling to the floor. Go back up, the voice said softly. We'll finish here. I didn't argue. I bolted. I took the stairs 2 at a time, lungs burning, heart threatening to tear itself apart. I didn't stop until I reached the lantern room, slamming the door behind me and throwing the lock. The footsteps did not follow. The vibration faded. At 3:19 a.m., the generator load returned to normal. I stood there shaking, staring at the locked door, knowing with terrible certainty that it hadn't needed me to leave. I checked the logbook one more time. A new entry had appeared, written with the same calm precision as before. Ground level invites negotiation. Below it, a final line, underlined once. Do not come down again. I stayed in the lantern room after that, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, my eyes fixed on the locked door, like it might decide to open itself if I looked away. Every instinct I had told me to keep moving, to stay busy, but the thought of descending, even a single step, made my stomach twist. The rule was clear now. The tower wasn't just a structure with levels. It was a boundary system, and I had crossed one I wasn't meant to. The clock crept forward with painful slowness. 3:27 a.m. The fog showed no sign of thinning. If anything, the beam looked dimmer as it cut through the grey, like the light itself was being absorbed. I checked the controls again, hands trembling, but the output was steady. The lighthouse was doing its job. I wasn't sure I still was. I replayed everything the voice had said. We'll finish here. This part is for the light. The implication gnawed at me. The lighthouse didn't just guide ships. It marked something, defined a place, kept something contained. And I was just the caretaker, the human piece that made sure the system stayed operational. At 3:34 a.m., the radio crackled again. I didn't answer immediately. I stared at it, heart pounding, weighing the risk. The emergency phone stayed silent. The radio, at least, was ambiguous. I lifted the receiver slowly. "This is Blackreef Light," I said. Static hissed, then faded into a familiar voice. Not the calm man from Coastal Operations. This one was rougher, edged with fatigue. "Tom, it's Eric." My breath caught. Eric had been my relief keeper the year before. He'd transferred suddenly. No explanation given. I hadn't heard from him since. "Eric," I said. "How?" "Listen to me." He cut in. "You're in the fog window, aren't you?" My throat tightened. "Yes." A sharp exhale came through the speaker. "Damn it. Okay. Don't panic. Just don't panic. You know about this," I said. It wasn't a question. "I know enough," he replied. "I stayed longer than I should have. That was my mistake." I glanced at the clock. 3:36 m.m. "You left," I said. "They said you transferred." He laughed softly, humorless. "That's what they call it when you make it out before you're useful." Cold washed over me. Useful for what? Another pause. I could hear something faint in the background on his end. Wind, or waves, or something mimicking them. "The fog isn't random," Eric said. "It's a cycle, midnight to dawn. The rules slow it down, shape it. But every keeper eventually gets tested." "Tested how?" "By temptation," he said. "By guilt. By routine. You want to help. You want to fix things. You want to look." The memory of the shape on the stairs flashed through my mind. "What happens if you fail?" Eric didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was quieter. "You don't disappear. That's the worst part. The light stays on. The logs stay neat. The next keeper reads the rules and thinks they're superstition." A low hum rose beneath his words, deep and resonant. My skin prickled. "Eric," I said, "where are you right now?" Another laugh, strained this time. "Not where I should be." At 3:41 a.m., the lantern flickered. Just once. Barely perceptible. But I felt it like a skipped heartbeat. The beam stuttered, then resumed its steady rotation. My chest tightened. Any interruption, even a brief one, could be disastrous for ships navigating the reef. "I think it's messing with the light," I said. "I know," Eric replied. "That's the final lever. They can't shut it off directly. They need you to do it, even for a second." The radio crackled, the static surging. Another voice bled through, overlapping his, distorted and wrong. "Thomas," it said gently. "The beam is misaligned." Eric cursed. "Don't listen to that. Don't answer it." The voice continued, smooth and patient. "You feel it too. The strain. The imbalance. You can fix it." "I already checked the alignment," I said, more to myself than to it. "From the wrong angle?" The voice replied. "Come closer." The lantern flickered again, longer this time. My pulse spiked. The instrument panel showed a momentary dip, then stabilized. Eric's voice cut back in, urgent. "They're lying. The system compensates automatically. They just need you to step into the beam." I swallowed hard. "Why?" "Because sight is consent," he said. "And light is the deepest kind of sight." The overlapping voice softened, almost tender. "We've been very patient with you." I backed away from the glass, pressing myself against the wall again. "I'm not doing anything," I said. "I'm staying right here." A pause followed. The radio hissed. Eric's breathing came through fast and shallow. "Good," he said. "That's good. Just hold on. Dawn usually comes around 5:10 this time of year." "You're close." "Usually," I echoed. He didn't answer. At 3:49 a.m., the foghorn sounded again. This time, both horns answered in perfect unison, the real and the false overlapping so closely they became indistinguishable. The sound vibrated through the tower, rattling glass and metal. The voice laughed softly. "We're learning your rhythms." The lantern light dimmed again, longer this time. Warning indicators flared briefly, then went dark. "Thomas," Eric said, his voice breaking. "If the light goes out, even for a moment, don't try to fix it. Let it be dark." "That goes against everything," I said. "I know," he replied. "That's the point. Darkness breaks the cycle. Light feeds it." The idea felt wrong on a fundamental level. The lighthouse existed to banish darkness. to invite ships safely through it. But the rules had already taught me that some instincts were traps. The radio crackled violently, Eric's voice distorting. "They're listening now." I shouldn't have called. "Eric, remember this?" he said quickly. "You are not the light. You are just the one who watches it." The line went dead. The lantern flickered again, then steadied. I stood alone in the dim room, the fog pressing in on all sides, the false horn echoing faintly through the night. I checked the time. 3:56 a.m. The logbook lay open on the desk. A new line had been added, the ink still fresh. "Assistance has been offered." Beneath it, written smaller, almost thoughtfully, "Your answer is pending." I stared at the words in the logbook until they blurred together, my eyes burning from exhaustion and fear. "Assistance has been offered. Your answer is pending." It felt less like a note and more like a countdown. I shut the book hard, the sound echoing too loudly in the lantern room, then immediately regretted it. The tower seemed to listen, every vibration traveling through stone and metal like nerves. I checked the clock again. 4:02 am. The fog was unchanged. The beam continued to rotate, slower than my heartbeat, carving pale arcs into nothing. I thought about what Eric had said. Let it be dark. The idea clawed at me. Every instinct, drilled into me over years of training, screamed that darkness was failure. Darkness meant wrecks, bodies, investigations, but nothing about this night fit the manuals I'd memorized. At 4:06 a.m., the lantern dimmed. Not a flicker this time. A slow, deliberate fading, like a hand easing a dial downward. Warning lights flared across the panel, silent but insistent. My muscles tensed, adrenaline surging. I stepped toward the controls without thinking, hand reaching out. Then the voice spoke. "Careful," it said, gently. "From everywhere and nowhere at once. You don't want to overcorrect." I froze, my hand inches from the panel. The glass around the lantern room seemed darker now, the fog outside thickening, pressing closer. My reflection wavered in the curved surface of the lens, distorted, stretched thin. "You feel responsible," the voice continued. "That's why you were chosen. That's why you've lasted this long." I pulled my hand back, clenching it into a fist. "I'm not agreeing to anything," I said. My voice sounded small in the vast, humming space. A pause. Then something like disappointment rippled through the air. "You already have," it replied. "Every time you turned the light on, the beam dimmed further. The warning indicators began to pulse. Somewhere far out in the fog, the false horn sounded again, closer now, almost perfectly matched to the lighthouse's own frequency. I remembered the handwritten note. Light is the deepest kind of sight. My gaze drifted, despite myself, toward the lens. It was beautiful in a way that hurt to look at. Layers of glass catching and bending the glow, magnifying it into something immense and alive. I felt a pull in my chest, a hollow ache, like the sensation before stepping off a high ledge. "Don't look. Don't step into the beam." At 4:11 a.m., the emergency phone rang. The sound snapped me back, sharp and jarring. I stared at it, torn. The rules hadn't mentioned the phone at this stage. That omission felt intentional again. I picked it up slowly. "Thomas Hale," the comm man's voice said. "Coastal operations," or something pretending to be it. "Status report." The voice was steady, professional. Safe, it wrapped around my nerves like a familiar blanket. "The lantern output is fluctuating," I said carefully. "Fog conditions persist." "Understood," the man replied. "You're doing well. Better than most." My grip tightened. Most of who? A faint smile crept into his voice. "Your predecessors." The lantern dimmed again, enough that the beam thinned, barely cutting the fog. Panic flared, hot and urgent. I took a step toward the controls. "Thomas," the man said softly, "you don't have to fight this. The system is old. It needs adjustment. All you have to do is step closer and make a manual correction." I looked at the clock. 4:13 a.m. Eric's words echoed in my head. "You are not the light. You are just the one who watches it. What happens if I don't?" I asked. Silence stretched on the line. Then, very quietly, the man answered. "Then the night stretches with you." The fog outside the glass shifted. not thinning, but rearranging, forming vague shapes that dissolved when I tried to focus on them. I felt watched from every angle, from within the walls, from within my own thoughts. The lantern dimmed to its lowest point yet. Alarms finally sounded, shrill and piercing. My heart hammered. This was it, the moment they wanted, the moment every instinct told me to act. I stepped back instead. I moved away from the controls, away from the lens, until my back hit the wall. My hands shook violently, but I forced them to my sides. "I'm not fixing it," I said louder now. "I'm letting it go dark." The voice on the phone hardened. That would be irresponsible. So is lying to me. I snapped. The lantern flickered wildly, the beam stuttering, then collapsing inward. The room plunged into near darkness, lit only by the dim stairwell bulb and the faint glow of the instrument panel. Outside, the fog swallowed the last of the light completely. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the screaming started. It came from the fog, from all directions at once. Not human voices exactly, but close enough to twist something deep in my gut. Anger, frustration, loss. The false horn blared, long and furious, overlapping itself in chaotic waves. The phone crackled violently. "You don't understand what you're interrupting," the man snarled. "Turn it back on." I dropped the receiver. It hit the floor with a dull thud and went silent. The tower shook, dust raining from the ceiling as something massive shifted outside, circling, scraping, testing. The footsteps returned, running now, no longer patient. The voice screamed my name, over and over, no longer careful with it. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my palms against my ears, counting my breaths, counting the seconds. I didn't move. I didn't look. I didn't step toward the beam. Slowly, gradually, the screaming faded. The vibration lessened. The footsteps retreated, dissolving into the fog. The false horn cut off mid-blast, leaving behind a ringing silence that made my ears ache. I opened my eyes. The lantern room was dark. Truly dark. For the first time since I'd taken the job, the light was off. I checked the clock with trembling hands. 4:07 a.m., the fog outside began to thin, not all at once. Just enough that I could see faint movement in the grey, the suggestion of distance returning. Sound followed. The distant crash of waves. The low moan of wind. I waited another 10 minutes before daring to turn the lantern back on. When I did, it came up clean and steady, the beam slicing through thinning fog like it always had. No alarms, no resistance. Dawn crept in slowly after that, pale and fragile. By 5:02 a.m., the fog had retreated completely, leaving the sea calm and empty around Black Reef Point. I opened the logbook one last time. The previous entries were still there. "Assistance has been offered. Your answer is pending." Below them, a new line had been added. The handwriting tighter now, less patient. "Refusal noted." Under that, pressed so hard the pen had nearly torn the page. "This cycle is incomplete." I closed the book as the sun finally broke the horizon. Its light warm and real and utterly different from the beam behind me. My shift ended at noon. I never stayed for another midnight. I thought that would be the end of it. After sunrise, everything looked ordinary in the way only daylight can make things look ordinary. The sea lay flat and blue, gulls cried somewhere beyond the rocks, and the lighthouse stood exactly as it always had, tall and solid and reassuring. No fog, no voices, no rules whispering at the edges of my thoughts. Just another morning on Black Reef Point. But the rules had never said the danger ended at dawn. They only said midnight was when it began. By 6:30 a.m., a supply boat appeared on the horizon right on schedule. I watched it through binoculars, half expecting it to distort or vanish, or split into something wrong. It didn't. It cut cleanly through the water, leaving a white wake behind it. Real. Solid. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding since the night before. The crew noticed my condition the moment they docked. I was pale, shaking, eyes rimmed red from a night without sleep. I told them I'd had a rough fog watch, nothing more. They exchanged looks but didn't press. People who work the coast learn quickly when not to ask questions. I signed the logs, handed over my reports, and packed my bag. As I zipped it closed, my gaze flicked to the rules sheet one last time. The handwritten notes were still there. They hadn't vanished with the fog. That unsettled me more than if they had. The relief keeper arrived just before noon. His name was Aaron. Young, enthusiastic. He shook my hand too firmly and told me he was excited to finally get assigned a classic lighthouse. I forced a smile and returned the handshake, my palm still trembling. Quiet place, he said, glancing out at the sea. Bet it gets boring. I almost laughed. Instead, I nodded, most of the time. I hesitated, then reached into my bag and pulled out the laminated rules sheet. I held it out to him. Read these, I said. Memorized them. He frowned slightly, flipping it over, scanning the text. Midnight fog procedures. He chuckled. They gave me a copy too. Guess every station has its quirks. Not quirks, I said, sharper than I intended. He looked up, surprised. I took a breath, steadying myself. Just follow them exactly, even if they don't make sense. Aaron studied me for a moment, then nodded. Got it. I didn't know if he really did. By 12:15 p.m., I was on the supply boat, watching Black Reef shrink into the distance. The lighthouse looked harmless in the midday sun, a white line against blue sky. No hint of the night it had just endured. No hint of what lived inside its routines. As the boat turned toward the mainland, I felt something loosen in my chest. The further away I got, the easier it was to breathe. I told myself it was over. That whatever cycle I'd interrupted would reset. That refusing it once was enough. I was wrong. It started with the dreams. The first night back on the mainland, I dreamed of fog filling my apartment, seeping under doors, pouring from vents. I stood in the center of my living room, holding a lantern that dimmed no matter how high I turned the dial. When I woke up, my sheets were damp with sweat, and my ears rang as if a horn had sounded just out of range. The dreams came every night after that. Sometimes I was back in the lighthouse, watching the beam cut through fog that never thinned. Sometimes I was below ground level, standing in front of a concrete wall that breathed. Always there was a voice, patient, familiar, waiting for me to answer a question it never quite asked. During the day, I started noticing small things. Lights flickering when I passed them. Reflections in glass that lagged just a fraction of a second behind my movements. The sound of distant foghorns in places nowhere near the coast. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was trauma. Sleep deprivation. My mind processing an intense experience the only way it knew how. I didn't tell anyone what had really happened. Not my supervisor. Not my doctor. Not even myself, if I could help it. 2 weeks after I left Black Reef, I received an email. No sender address, no subject line, just a single sentence in the body. Refusal delays, but it does not resolve. I stared at the screen for a long time before deleting it. When I checked the trash folder, it was already gone. I called Eric that night. The number I had for him still worked, but it rang endlessly, never going to voicemail. I tried again the next day. Same result. Eventually, the number stopped connecting at all, replaced by a flat tone that sounded eerily like the emergency phone at the lighthouse when the line went dead. A month passed. The dreams intensified. The fog in them began appearing earlier, before midnight. Sometimes I heard my name spoken, just as I drifted off to sleep, gentle and coaxing. I started leaving lights on at night without realizing it, waking up to every lamp in my apartment glowing softly. One evening, as I stood in my kitchen, I caught myself aligning the lights deliberately, adjusting their angles so they overlapped just right. The realization hit me like cold water. I was recreating the beam. I stepped back, heart racing, and turned everything off, plunging the room into darkness. The relief I felt was immediate and overwhelming, like scratching an unbearable itch. In the silence that followed, I almost thought I heard disappointment. That was when I understood the last line in the logbook. This cycle is incomplete. The lighthouse hadn't let me go. It didn't need to. The cycle wasn't bound to the tower or the fog or even the coast. It was bound to attention, to observation, to someone willing to watch the light. I started avoiding mirrors. I stopped going near the shoreline. I kept my apartment dark as much as possible, even during the day. The dreams continued, but they softened, like something waiting patiently for me to slip. Last week, I received another email. Still no sender. Still no subject. We require a keeper. That was all it said. I don't know what happens if I ignore it forever. I don't know if dawn is still negotiable when you're no longer near the sea. All I know is that sometimes, late at night, when the world goes quiet and the lights hum softly around me, I feel the same pull I felt in the lantern room. And I have to remind myself, over and over, of the only rule that ever really mattered. I am not the light. I am just the one who watches it. I'm writing this now because the emails stopped. That should have felt like relief. Instead, it terrified me. For weeks after the last message, my life became an exercise in vigilance. I kept my apartment dim, curtains drawn even during the day. I unplugged lamps. I taped over LEDs on electronics. I stopped watching television. I stopped scrolling at night. Any source of steady light felt like a temptation, like a door left ajar. When I slept, I did it in darkness so complete it felt unnatural, like I was burying myself alive every night just to feel safe. It helped. At first, the dreams faded into something softer, less urgent. The fog still came, but it stayed at the edges. The voice stopped using my name. Sometimes it wasn't there at all. I told myself that meant I'd won, in whatever small way winning was possible. That refusing long enough starved it. That cycles once broken stayed broken. I went back to work. Not as a keeper. Never that. I took a desk job inland, inspections and reports. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead all day. I hated the lights, but I learned to tolerate them. Artificial. Harsh. Unfocused. They didn't feel like an invitation. They felt like noise. Then, 3 nights ago, the power went out. It wasn't just my building. It was the whole block. A transformer failure, according to the news later. At the time, all I knew was that my apartment went dark at exactly 11:58 p.m. I sat very still on my couch, heart pounding, listening to the sudden absence of sound. No distant traffic, just silence pressing in from all sides. I checked my phone. No signal. No data. The screen was the only light left, a small, bright rectangle in the darkness. I thought about Eric. About the keepers who hadn't made it out. About the way the rules had never said the fog needed the sea. At 12:00 a.m., my phone screen dimmed automatically. I nearly dropped it. I turned the brightness back up with shaking fingers. The light steadied. Nothing else happened. I waited, breath held, counting seconds in my head. 1 minute passed, then 2. At 12:07 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Slow, measured, familiar. I stood up, every nerve screaming at me to stay still, to make no sound. The footsteps stopped outside my door. I stared at the wood, at the peephole I'd taped over weeks ago, at the thin line of darkness beneath it. There was no knock. Instead, the smoke detector chirped once. I flinched hard enough to make my shoulders ache. The sound echoed unnaturally loud in the dark apartment. I stared up at the ceiling, pulse roaring in my ears. The detector was hardwired. It shouldn't have been affected by the outage. Another chirp, then a third, each one spaced perfectly, like a signal. I thought about Rule 4. If the foghorn activates on its own, log the time, but do not attempt to disable it. The footsteps resumed, moving away this time, slow and patient. I stayed frozen until they faded completely, until the building felt empty again. Only then did I realize my hands were clenched so tightly my nails had broken skin. The power came back at 12:19 a.m. Too neat. Too familiar. Lights flickered on throughout the apartment, harsh and sudden. I winced and turned them off as fast as I could, plunging the space back into shadow. My phone buzzed in my hand. 1 new email. No sender. No subject. The light returned. I didn't sleep after that. I sat at my kitchen table until dawn, the room lit only by the faint glow from the street outside. When the sun finally rose, I felt no relief. Just exhaustion. The kind that sinks into your bones and stays there. That morning I made a decision. I requested my old files. All of them. Incident reports, transfer records, medical leaves, unexplained resignations. It took favors and lies and more than a little guilt, but I got them. I read through decades of Lighthouse personnel histories, not just Black Reef, but others like it. Remote stations, fog-prone coasts, places where isolation and routine overlapped perfectly. Patterns emerged. Keepers who lasted years without incident, then left abruptly. Keepers who transferred inland, only to quit again within months. A few who died in accidents that didn't quite make sense. A few who vanished entirely. Their positions quietly filled, their names slowly forgotten. And scattered through the notes, in margins and attachments and handwritten addendums, were familiar phrases. Refusal noted. Cycle incomplete. Keeper reassigned. I don't think it needs a specific place. I think places like Black Reef are just efficient. Focused. The fog, the beam, the rules, they concentrate attention. They make it easier. But once you understand the system, once you've been part of it, you carry it with you. You learn how to watch. Tonight, I'm sitting in a rented room far from the coast. No fog here. No sea. Just a single lamp on a desk, its light angled carefully toward the wall. Not too bright. Not too dim. Controlled. I know what this sounds like. Rationalizations. Slipping. That's what I keep telling myself. But the truth is simpler and worse. The emails haven't returned because I stopped refusing. I haven't agreed either. Not explicitly. I found a balance. I keep the light on, but only enough to see. I watch it, but I don't step into it. I don't invite. I don't look too closely. I don't let it go completely dark. The fog hasn't come back. Not yet. But sometimes, when midnight passes and the room is quiet, I feel a presence settle in. Not outside, not inside, but somewhere in between. Observing, waiting, satisfied for now. If you're reading this because you've been offered a quiet job somewhere remote, somewhere old, somewhere wrapped in routine and rules, understand this: they don't need you forever. They just need you to watch. And once you learn how, you never really stop.